He's just using refugees as a political shield because of his own failure to be able to deliver anything good for this country. This is exactly the same conversation that I've been having for the last 5 years about Tory governments. This isn't going to make one blind bit of difference to the number of people who make the crossing on the boats. All this is going to do, all this has done, is it's given Keir Starmer a zinger of a line to come out with at PMQs today. I am a campaigner and a researcher for the rights of all migrants in the UK.
Can you tell us about the new Home Office guidance for assessing small boat refugees and how it differs from the previous guidance?
Yeah, so yesterday the government introduced changes to the immigration rules. That means they don't have to pass legislation, they can just change it. And the changes meant that anybody who has come to the UK through an irregular route, so that could be on a small boat, or it could be sometimes people try to stay in the back of vans and trucks, various different ways that asylum seekers try to come to the UK through irregular means. Anybody who has come to the UK through those means has been recognised as a refugee and who has then applied for citizenship will be denied citizenship. So at the current time, actually, that's the situation, because that's how quick it can change, because they don't have to pass primary legislation. But up until yesterday, if you were recognized as a refugee in this country, no matter how you had come here, after 5 years, you would be entitled to apply for indefinite leave to remain. And after one more year, so 6 years in total, you would be entitled to apply for citizenship. And that's been wiped away, rug pulled out from under the feet of anybody who arrived here through irregular means.
There's this phrase in the Home Office guidance that coming here through via small boat is a strike against the good character of a citizenship applicant. What do you make of that sort of language or way of assessing an asylum seeker by their good character, and how coming here on a small boat might violate that?
So the good character provision in citizenship law has always been really problematic, just because what it was intended to do was to prevent anybody who had come to the UK and was committing serious crime from being able to obtain citizenship. But in fact, it's very nebulous how it's phrased in the law, and it gives a huge amount of discretion to the Home Secretary to make decisions on that basis. And it probably won't be surprising to learn that over time, decisions to deny people on the basis of a good character assessment are often result in racially discriminatory outcomes. So it's always been a problematic part of the law. What it does by being applied to people who enter the UK on small boats is that it creates a catch-22 once again for refugees. Like the first catch-22, if you're a refugee, is that you have to escape your home. That's the definition of a refugee, somebody who must leave and escape from danger. But there is no safe way for you to reach a country of refuge. And that includes all countries, all the rich Western countries, not just the UK. So it's not as though they could safely go to Spain, but instead they choose to cross the Channel. There are no options available to them. And a small number of people seek to come to the UK, and then they are penalised for having travelled through an irregular route. But the problem is there aren't any regular ways they could have travelled. And obviously the solution to this would be to create regulated pathways for people to travel safely for the purpose of claiming asylum in the UK. But that's not on the cards. And what is on the cards is now this political stunt to deny them the possibility of integrating in the long term.
What do you think that denial, what sort of impact will that have on people who already have indefinite leave to remain in the UK, but now can no longer access British citizenship?
Well, British citizenship is a very important step for a lot of migrants in the UK, especially refugees, because once again, these are people who've lost everything. They've lost their homes, their families, the streets that they were familiar with, all of their possessions. They've lost absolutely everything. And they come and rebuild in a new place. And a sense of belonging is incredibly important to people's well-being. It's also a sense of security, of safety, of long-term status here. And in really practical terms, what it can mean is the difference between you know, being able to envision a future or not. So if you think about the Syrian refugees who have made the UK their home over the last decade and more, um, they've been watching the fall of the Assad regime and the possibility, the hope that's come into being that there could be a safe and stable democratic Syria in the future that they might be able to return to. Now, if you came 7, 8 years ago and you have citizenship in this country as a Syrian refugee, then what you're able to do now is go and visit tentatively. Go and see, is my house still standing? Is my family still alive? Go and see what the situation looks like and whether it might be viable to start thinking about return. But if all you have is refugee status and you don't have citizenship, then you don't have the right to do that because your status in the UK back here would not be safe if you traveled to Syria again, right? So you are then unable to take the steps that any refugee would want to do to go and see whether it might be possible to rebuild their lives and to see their relatives again now that the situation is changing, but without making the decision to ultimately move back straight away because it's clearly not yet known whether it will be safe and stable in Syria for the long term. So it just stops people from being able to live their lives. It stops people from being able to be part of our communities. It stops people from being able to vote, no matter how long they live here. Because if you don't have citizenship as a refugee, you're not entitled to vote. It just locks people out and makes people other and reduces people's rights. And it's all for the sake of political expediency. It's really contemptible.
Do you think that this new guidance will have any effect whatsoever on the number of small boat crossings?
This will do absolutely nothing to the number of people crossing on small boats to the UK. The reason why people cross on small boats to the UK is because they have escaped from war, persecution, famine, disease, danger, violence. This doesn't do anything to change that. Nobody who is making that crossing, nobody who is making that kind of escape is assessing the citizenship law of the country that they're going to, is reading those paragraphs and paragraphs of immigration rules that we have on the UK statute book. They don't know. They don't know. They're just trying to get to a place where they think they'll be safe. That's all. And this isn't going to make one blind bit of difference to the number of people who make the crossing on the boats. All this is going to do, all this has done, is it's given Keir Starmer a zinger of a line to come out with at PMQs today. That's it. That's it. That's the entire benefit to anybody. He's just using refugees as a political shield because of his own failure to be able to deliver anything good for this country.
Do you think that the Labour Party are pursuing this new guidance because they feel pressured from the right, from parties like Reform and their hardline anti-immigration stances?
Yes, I think that they are pursuing this because they feel pressure from Reform. I think that they're also pursuing this because they feel pressure from their own immeasurable failure. So, because of the economic forecasts that we're seeing from the Bank of England, and because of the Treasury's self-imposed fiscal rules that prevent them from increasing borrowing, what we're looking at in the next few months is the likelihood that this Labour government that just got elected on the basis of change is going to introduce new cuts to public services that everyone already knows are on their knees. They're in an absolutely disastrous situation going into the local elections that are coming up. The polls are just an embarrassment for them. And they have reached the point after just 6 months in government that the previous Tory administration reached after about a decade. They've run out of ideas already. They've got nothing. They don't know how to create growth to pull it out of their back pocket. They've tried scrapping our climate goals and, encouraging us to go ahead with a third runway at Heathrow. That hasn't made any difference. Of course it doesn't. And they've run out of road already. They don't really have a project for this country, but they really do want to stay in power. And they think that the way to do that is to give refugees a kicking.
Is this a betrayal of voters who perhaps thought that they were voting for a Labour Party that was opposing the Conservative stance on immigration, that was opposing things like the Rwanda plan?
Absolutely, it is. I mean, you tell me, does this look like change? This is exactly the same conversation that I've been having for the last 5 years about Tory governments. It's exactly the same thing that the Conservatives were doing. And Labour was elected on a message, not of great detail, but of change and of scrapping the biggest, most visible symbol of Tory hostility towards refugees, which was the Rwanda plan. And they said that's dead in the water on day one. And that's what people voted for. I mean, it's easy to forget, given the media landscape that we live in and the political forces that we are ruled by. But actually, people voted for Labour on the basis that they weren't the Tories and the Reform Party, and they weren't the party that defined itself by hostility towards immigration. People voted for Labour because they wanted fairer taxation, more tax on billionaires. They wanted protections for the environment, and they wanted, most of all, for our public services to be supported. And once again, Labour is failing to do that. It's got nothing to deliver on that front. And all it's doing is pivoting, just like the Tories did, back to giving migrants a kicking. And I think they'll learn that they're not only going to lose votes to the Reform Party at the upcoming local elections, they're going to hemorrhage votes to the Greens, the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, SNP, because there are lots and lots of people who just didn't vote for this, who just don't want this. And this doesn't interest them. If you look at Labour voters, they don't prioritize immigration. It's not what they care about. It's not what they want to see. And this is going to kick them in the teeth at the local elections. But you know what? I bet they don't learn the lesson. I bet because the only lesson that politicians learn at the moment, the only lesson that they are capable of taking in is that you have to move further right and further right and further right on migration. And it's not what the people want. It doesn't do us any good. But that is the doom loop that we apparently are caught in at the moment.
Is there a chance that this guidance could be challenged in the court? Because there's suggestions that it might be in violation of the United Nations Refugee Convention, which forbids punishing a person for their method of entry into a country if they're entering with the intention to claim asylum.
Yeah. This is in clear contravention of the Refugee Convention. Not only does the Refugee Convention forbid you from penalizing someone for taking an irregular journey, as you say, it also states in black and white that states must facilitate the integration and naturalization of refugees. This is the exact opposite to what we're doing here. So it's very obviously not in line with the Refugee Convention, and it is likely to be challenged in the courts. However, you have to ask yourself if that's the intention, because there isn't a court that adjudicates the Refugee Convention. There isn't an international court that exists to hold the government to account on this. That was supposed to be governed by the principle of never again, that we weren't going to let this happen again. That's why we introduced the Refugee Convention after the Second World War, because we allowed Jewish refugees to be sent back to the gas chambers. That's what we did. And we said, shouldn't have done that. We should introduce rules that mean that if somebody is in danger for their life, we will give them a safe home. And one of the things we will do is we will help them integrate into our societies. And to turn our backs on that, there's very few checks and balances that actually stop a state that wants to do that. It's meant to be, we're just meant to be governed by the good guys. And unfortunately, in times like these, and we're seeing it really, really clearly in the US as well, that isn't enough protection, unfortunately.
Zoe Gardner, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you.